Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. And my co-host, my co-chair for the day, is a writer, a director, a producer. You have been watching her work for years, whether it's in the form of producing something like the VHS anthology series. You have been watching her directorial work, perhaps in short form, like the anthology Southbound or XX, which she's also a producer. Or maybe you have seen some of her feature directing work, Body at Brighton Rock, or there's the new movie coming out, There's Something Wrong with the Children. And then, of course, we cannot forget the smattering of television directing work you have done for shows like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and Riverdale and Creepshow. Roxanne Benjamin, what else do the people need to know about you before we get started?
That's about it. That's all I got.
It felt fairly comprehensive.
Yeah.
To open it up with the new work, give us the line on There's Something Wrong with the Children. I will say, children horror movies just upset me to no end because the watching them kind of, when you know it's a child horror movie and you know they're going to kind of, it's like, okay, they're going to get away with anything. It's like, yeah, they would. Like, they would. That's absolutely what would happen. We would be at their mercy, and I'm angry, and I'm very angry that is true.
Yeah, so what can I tell you about the movie? It's two couples go for a friendly, fun weekend getaway in the woods, and one couple has the other couple watch their kids so they can rekindle some romance in their relationship.
Indeed.
And said other couple manages to lose those kids overnight, and when they find them, when they come back, one of them believes that the kids are not as they seem. And horror movie
ensues.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of like these characters, are you couple with kids or are you couple negligently losing track of kids? Which would be the more Roxanne Benjamin?
I'm probably the evil kids, honestly, but like I am hardcore the couple with no kids that no one trusts their children to, because it'll be like a week later and it'll be like, so we crossed the border, we got tattoos, lost track of them somewhere around Arizona. So yeah, that would be me.
Well, the character that you have brought for us to discuss today is a real older millennial Gen X tentpole. So who are we discussing today that is a quality touch point for you, Roxanne?
Today we are talking about Daria.
La, 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 la. This is my stuff. Got to get off. I may go pop. Excuse me. Excuse me. I've got to be direct.
The titular Daria. Now, were you a Daria watcher in its first run when it was coming out with new stuff, or were you like binging Daria later on, catching up down the line?
Oh no, I was watching it as it came out.
Yeah.
Definitely as it came out, because I was one of said elder millennials.
Yep, that's me.
I was in, high school, the end of high school when it came out, and just getting into college. So it was kind of right around my junior, senior year of high school, I think, when it came out.
That feels kind of perfect.
Yeah, and then right into college from there. And there's like a couple of like college things that happen at the end of the series, I think. So it felt it was like of its time, and also I was of the exact same age as the characters. So
yeah. Does that mean like you within your daily high school life, were you floating through it and sort of observing and commenting on it as a Daria does? Were you sort of like blithely disconnected from the environment?
Right here and now, let's pledge to make Daria's dream a reality.
You mean the one where people walking down the street burst into flames?
The coffee house. We'll plan it, locate it, raise the money, and open it.
Would that qualify as an extracurricular activity?
Of course.
Then I'd like to register as a conscientious objector.
Yes, I got called Daria a lot by a lot of people.
Oh, really? This was like literally, okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't just me like, responding to this character or feeling like I saw myself. Everyone else also saw me in this character.
Was that a welcome identification when people like would dub you Daria? Were you like, yes, absolutely, that is true, thank you so much? Or were you like, I don't know, I don't see it?
No, I definitely saw it. Saw it. Me and my small group of misfits, we definitely saw it. There's a point, I think, in the series where she refers to herself as the misery chick. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's how everybody sees us, you know? We were these just kind of weird misfits in this very small rural town. And Daria is set in kind of like a suburb, but, all felt very kind of a kind to everything that it was making fun of on the show or that it was commenting on the show. And I feel like that was my go-to kind of response, which you can probably see in a lot of like in my movies as well, as just this sort of like stoic deadpan humor, I guess, to what's happening in the scenario. So yeah, that was definitely my coping mechanism, was this almost exact personality of this character.
And did you feel like there were those well-worn archetypes that make up the kind of world of Daria and make up the sort of popular imagination of what high school is? Your Quinn cheerleaders, your misery chicks, your Treys, and like your jocks. Was that the landscape around you as well? Were you living this sort of archetypal high school experience?
100%. 100%. It was very Breakfast Club up in there. Also, it's like a small rural town. This is pre-internet, which most people might not remember. It's kind of, I feel like it was also referred to as like the Oregon Trail generation. I'd heard that term of like kind of,
that's 100% me.
Like 79 to like 84 or something like that, of like this generation that we were the last ones to grow up without the internet, and also have to like bridge the gap between these kind of like Gen Xers and boomers and kind of the younger generation who grew up with nothing but that. So I don't know, it was a very kind of like unique experience, I think. And we didn't have a lot of the outside influences. So there was definitely a sense of like, if you don't fit into these cookie cutter things within the stereotypes that are there, like it was a very existentially lonely place to be. As much as it's this like gorgeous Allegheny woods of Pennsylvania, it's very alienating when you're kind of like a creative weirdo who doesn't feel like you fit into like these molds of what the stereotypes are. You just have like someone's like older brother or older sister who like comes back from college and like has cool music that they show you like that. It's when that still happened, and like they show you like cool records and you're like, there's an escape. We just have to make it to high school and then we can get out of here.
Well, I'm wondering, like, when, like, thinking in terms of, like, going for a TV character instead of a film character, and then were you much of a film watcher when you were in high school?
No, not at all, because all we had was like we had a Blockbuster, and then we had like an independent video store that was also like a gas station and also had tanning beds. So there was that, and that was on the other side of town. The closest thing was like a Blockbuster. So it was just like you were still going off of like the covers as like the thing.
When did you start because like the 90s feels like it was kind of proliferate with female star figures, that kind of Daria would not have been out of place on a red carpet or in a scene photo alongside like a Natasha Lyonne and a Chloe Sevigny and a Christina Ricci.
And like a Fiona Apple or something.
Yes, exactly. And so like when did you start becoming aware of like cinematic counterparts to and like start engaging with film in your own way to be like, okay, this is an access point for me and also something I'm interested in beyond being casually connected to it?
In that time period, like during high school, I would say it was like Empire Records and The Craft.
Oh man, there you go.
I watched over and over and over again. And Empire Records was one that was like completely like out of nowhere, because it never came out like in theaters, right? Isn't that? And it was like, I saw it, my friends and I saw it on MTV because of the music video. And we were like, what is this movie?
Yeah, like Sugar High.
Movie? Yeah. Or wasn't that? It was something else, I think. it was a different music video, but it has a lot of footage from the movie.
Oh, like
And
when
we're
they
like,
would
we
do
don't-
the music videos that were just like Brian Williams, Everything I Do It For You is just a montage of Robin Hood.
Yes,
And
totally.
and like Aerosmith is just a like, what is the Armageddon song? It's just a montage of scenes
Yeah.
from Armageddon. Oh yeah, that golden era of the music video.
Yeah. It's weird how much MTV, I think, really shaped it really did shape the culture of like the 90s, because that was like our internet. That's all we had.
That was where you watched Daria, right?
Yeah. That and liquid television. There was all kinds of like weird, bizarre late night like music videos and like.
Oh, and I called Brian
Flux was
Adams
on
Brian
there.
Williams. Sorry to Brian Adams, who is not Ryan Adams either. Sorry to Brian Adams about everything
Really
I
put
do
those
it
together.
for you.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird shit on there late night too.
Oh yeah,
Dog Boy.
late night MTV and early morning MTV ruled.
Yeah.
I would watch MTV before I would go to school in the morning.
Yeah, but The Craft was a big one too, because that was also kind of like goth teen misfits. You know, the We Are the Weirdos, Mister.
Oh yeah.
Girls, watch out for those weirdos.
We are the weirdos, mister.
God, I always wanted to do a remake of that movie.
Now, did the goth girl sensibility, did that carry you through into college? Or how long was that sort of your a strong identifying character, proto-goth?
God, I feel like that's like my inner core. My inner child is definitely like a goth teen at like, you know, listening to like dark wave, writing bad poetry and smoking clove cigarettes to this day.
You are still the dream of the 90s, Roxanne Benjamin. The dream of the 90s is alive in you.
Yeah, I don't know if I like, you know, I kind of had my phase of like the dyeing my hair black and like dark makeup and all that stuff, but I kind of grew out of that, but still kept the attitude, I think, and music taste that went along with it through my early college years. But I also was kind of all over the place. Like I lived abroad for a while. You know,
so Daria would totally.
I went to like
abroad. 3
different colleges, like in different states. So I was kind of a bit all over the place. And all of it was like amazing to me because like I, you know, growing up at like where it's like we have more cows than people.
Yeah.
And more deer than people. It's everything is like an urban, like sophisticated environment, you know?
Right. Well, then I'm wondering when you started making things for yourself, when you started producing, when you started directing, were like to come in with like a TV character as opposed to a film character in a situation like this, did you feel like you were getting from movies what you needed, or was it like, I'm going to start doing this because I feel like there are holes that I need to fill of things that I would like to see?
Man, that's a tough question.
Big question.
Yeah, because I don't know if I really came at storytelling from a way of trying to portray myself on screen in any way.
Sure. But even just as a matter of like what you felt like there was there an absence of to you around what you did want to see? Or were you just like, no, I've seen what I want and I want to be a part of making that myself?
I think it's more in that regard, but I really came to film in a backwards way, I think. I didn't go to film school. I went to like, I got a theater degree and like creative writing degree. So it was like writing and theater and really like production management, stage management. And I was working at the Belcourt Theater, which is in Nashville. It's like an art house, calendar house theater. And it was the old original Grand Ole Opry. And you can go behind the screens there because there's like the stage. And I would just sit back there and watch people watch movies like a total creep. And that's what made me want to move from like working in nonprofit arts management as like my goal as to working into like entertainment is watching people watch movies in this art house theater.
Oh, wow.
So I think I weirdly came to film from the idea of like wanting to affect people in a certain way rather than like a specific story to tell. And the things that like, I was also a huge horror fan, and I grew up more in horror books than like horror movies. I think other than like what was on cable, because again, it's like there was no real engine of like recommendation, you know, back then. So it was either like something Gilbert Gottfried introduced me to at late night, like on USA Up All Night, Gonzo movies were like our public access played like Romero movies all the time. And I read a lot of like Stephen King and like Anne McCaffrey and like, or not Anne McCaffrey, Anne Rice, although also Anne McCaffrey because I was a big fantasy nerd. But a lot of Stephen King, Anne Rice, and like Dean Koontz books. So that was kind of like my horror base, I guess. And I came from like more of like the writing and storytelling perspective than like a visual perspective, and like more working with like actors, I think, on the theater side than like a cinematic perspective, where I feel like a lot of my cohort came from from everything from like a movie background and like visual aspect of storytelling, where I feel like mine is more emotionally based and character based from, I guess, what my background is there. But horror felt like a no-brainer because that was what always made me happy and like cheered me up, like just dealing with like any sort of stress in a theater with a bunch of people where like you get scared and then laugh about it.
Yeah.
And roller coaster horror, as I deem it, which is what Feels Like the Craft is, and like movies like Final Destination.
I have absolutely described movies as horror movies as roller coaster movies. Like I think when I saw Annabelle Comes Home, I was like, somebody asked me, and I was like, it is a perfect roller coaster horror movie. And I think that accurately conveyed the experience of watching it. So I'm glad that you have latched onto that as well.
Yeah. So roller coaster horror and slumber party horror is the other, and the other term I use a lot is slumber party horror, that you just want to share with a bunch of people and like get scared and be dumb. So those were the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. And that was like the kind of thing I wanted to portray. And usually it comes from, I think, the misfit character or the kind of like acerbic character commenting on what's happening, I guess, is where I feel like a lot of my writing comes from. So in that regard, I guess I do put myself in my writing in that way. It's like that's always the character I gravitate towards and is the easiest to write for me.
Like in Body of Bright Rock, you're
commenting. Your
star of that is like she's a bit of a fish out of water in her new context as like a park ranger. And then so she would be the most out of her depth person to deal with the situation she finds herself in, and is sort of like lovably uncomfortable in her environs.
Yeah. That one was like an interesting one because that came out of just this idea that I had seen all of these movies that were like, you know, it's like someone who's out, like you say, out of their depth, and then within like 5 minutes of the movie, they're suddenly an expert in like their scenario and they're just like battling everything and like coming out on top. And I was like, what if you had just like a dope?
Yeah.
Who, like,
what if she was like, bad at this a lot?
What if she was bad at everything? It was just like, I don't know what the fuck to do. My brain's going to shut down. But like then she has to get through it anyway because that's life. Like you don't get to just like call in sick and like you have to like do it anyway if you're in a scenario. So that was like where that idea kind of generated from, was like more of just, she never really gets better. She's just got to like live through it, and sometimes living through it is good enough. The stuff I want to write and the stuff that I want to make movie wise myself is much more in the vein of like, like a Jennifer's Body, or you know, I feel like I really associated with Juno a lot too when that came out. And I also got compared to that character a lot.
Hey, yeah, I'm just calling to procure a hasty abortion. What? Can you just hold on for a second? I'm on my hamburger phone.
Which feels like another version of Daria.
Yes, no, really. It absolutely, it's Daria with Diablo Cody in her mouth.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I find interesting about, like, one of my favorite, like, misassessments of Jennifer's Body when it came out is the sort of snide undercutting of the language that Diablo Cody uses in her scripts, and particularly at that time, heavily affected in that way. And I remember it sort of being described at the time as like, this is just so rooted in the present, it's going to become dated so quickly. And I remember like thinking, A, you're being really disrespectful of just like a highly stylized, like very femme way of presenting like a vernacular, like a teenage vernacular. And also, this isn't anchored to any fucking time. These people don't sound like teenagers in 2009. They sound like teenagers in Diablo Cody's head. So I find actually like the Diablo speak in that movie to me has actually aged even better, because we realize that like that wasn't a time capsule of 2009. It was a time capsule of this screenwriter, this artist and creative in that moment in her career. And that doesn't mean it's just like dated by the time we get to it. It's just like, what a fascinating artifact in like the timeline of this person who writes screenplays.
I kind of feel the same way about Clueless, because it's not really like
Agreed.
It's incredibly stylized, and no one actually talked like that.
No one ever said they were riding the Crimson Wave when they were on their period until after maybe they saw Clueless and they were like, that's cheeky. Like, I'll do that.
Exactly.
But it's a movie that, if anything, created a kind of like a micro vernacular among really big appreciators of it, but it didn't draw from like how we were talking.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why, because I feel like a lot of TV tries to do that in the moment now when they're kind of seeing what's out there. And I feel like in the next 6 months, we're going to have like a lot of scripts where the teenagers are saying like, it's giving. And it's going to be like, this is going to feel so dated. Like, you don't understand. Like, you can't do this. Like, this doesn't work this way. Like, it's so sped up at this point. Like the culture and the vernacular that like you kind of have to make your own the way that Jennifer's body does, or it's just going to sound ridiculous.
It's time for us to take a break, and then we will be back with Roxanne Benjamin, and later I will have one quick thing before I go about what we won't be seeing at the Oscar nominations this year. So we're just going to vent about that a little bit at the end of the show. Stick around.
Parenting. It's hard, but don't worry, you're not alone. Belly up to the low bar with One Bad Mother, and let us remind you that fine is good enough.
They want to climb on different things. And how am I supposed to keep them both from dying?
There is a right way to do this. And if I can figure out that right way, I'm going to be a good parent. So that is not a thing.
So join us each week and let us tell you that you are doing a good job. You can listen to One Bad Mother on Maximum Fun or wherever you get your podcasts.
This week on Bullseye, Tom Hanks, as you've never heard him before. Mad.
You moron! Thank you for the use of the turn signal. Way to use your blinker, idiot!
That's Bullseye from MaximumFun.org and NPR.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. I've been talking with film and television director Roxanne Benjamin, whose new movie is called There's Something Wrong with the Children. If that sounds like a headline that might appear on Sick Sad World, that's no surprise. Let's get back to our conversation about MTV's Daria and all she represents.
Next on Sick Sad World.
Regarding sleepover horror and roller coaster horror, do you feel interested in teen horror? With we're talking about Daria, we're talking about things like The Craft. Does teen horror or teen genre live in you at all? Or are you like, it's not me anymore. It's not where I'm at.
That's a tough one because I've done so much kind of like teen murder mystery TV at this point.
Right, yeah.
It's been like 5 TV shows in a row, I think, that are kind of within that same vein, within that same very niche genre. Of which is kind of fun because then it's you're dealing with all this like teen romance stuff and teen drama, but then also like murders, and you're getting to shoot some action stuff and some like good horror scenes and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's not really, I don't know. I feel like I would be much more interested in doing something like The Crow, which was another like mid 90s big touch point for me, that deals with maybe even like a younger, more precocious female character. Or
I love the angsty cusp Gen Xer of you. I love how much of that you're bringing to the table.
Really going for that. Want to bring that back. But I also feel like as a teenager, what I liked was seeing like older character. You want to see characters in like college and stuff like that for the most part. Like that's what I feel like was such a draw for like Empire Records. It's like it didn't feel like they were in high school. It felt like these are kids who were like off on their own, like working at a cool record store, like post college or still in college. So something more like in that world is like that feels like what draws me, I think. Although I even just said like, I'd love to do The Craft.
Yes. I mean, listen, I would kind of like to see each person's the craft. Like, there are certain movies that I kind of just want to see done kind of infinity times. Let's make that an acting exercise. Somebody gets a craft every year to do with what they see fit.
Yeah.
No,
it's like Spider-Man. It's like every 2 or 3 years we get a new one.
Yeah.
And it's the same story, so why not?
Yeah, so why not? And I have got the chance to talk to like Ty West about this, and I wanted to get your read on it too, because you were obviously right there. I was when he came on here, I talked to him about what was sort of the experience like of the time in the early 2000s, being a part of like the anthology era, and when the VHS collective, that movement popped up, and it sort of planted the seeds for what would sort of, I think, be yielded from that crop. Yes, and David Bruckner too. I it's based on that. What we would yield later as like the crop from these seeds planted 5 to 10 years later, who we're seeing now making their feature films. Mm-hmm. What was that period in filmmaking like for you, and sort of what did it feel like perhaps in comparison to now?
Good question. It's hard to tell because I'm older now, and like all of us are older, and we had that kind of like within a certain time period where we're all very early in our careers, including me as a producer and all of them as like writer directors. And we were all kind of like on the horror film circuit, going to all of these different film festivals and stuff. And just from getting to know each other and fighting about movies really is how that came about. And then it's like also that you have the time to make that kind of stuff in between other stuff that you're trying to make. Because it's not that big of a commitment as a filmmaker when you're making this small piece of something versus having to make the whole thing. For me, it was the whole thing because I was there through all of it. And
for you, it was the whole thing.
Yeah. And it was, I don't know, it was very kind of like reaction, I think, to, I feel like we had a glut of like copycat horror that was still happening from Blair Witch, like OG Blair Witch at that point, and then had gone through like a bit of the like Saw, like very hardcore violent gore torture era of horror. And it's like we all kind of wanted to get back to something lighter, and a lot of those guys, we all had the same sensibility in that regard, so it was fun to try to make something all together in that way. And then from there, even like Southbound, I feel like is much more like kind of sarcastic. And right around then, Adam and Simon were making You're Next as well, and which was like kind of a throwback to Scream in that same vein of just this almost like commentary on horror that allowed itself to like not take itself too seriously and could be fun at the same time as being like scary. And it's more like thrilling.
I didn't like Your Next when it first came out because I was not experiencing it. I was not watching it correctly. And I did not see that it was doing that. So I was like, what, this dumb movie? Like, what's it? And then years later, I went back to it and I was like, oh, like, I see what everything I thought was like a misfire was completely intentional. And it was like, oh, when this is all on purpose, this is some great shit we've got here. Wow.
It's like the final destination of like home invasion movies, you know? So it's very like almost, how can you make something meta within that genre if that genre is so kind of tired? And I feel like we're kind of back to that a little bit right now, which is fun, even with like things like Barbarian that like, you know, it takes a hard left turn and becomes something that's like a commentary on something else, but it's also like really funny, even though it's really dark at the same time. And that's a hard thing to pull off. I think you have to really know the ins and outs of the genre for that to work. But that stuff's more my jam. I love like, you know, Rube Goldberg horror. Like that's, I'm all about it. The stuff that it's just like more fun to see. I'm all about jump scares too. Like it's just the cheapest.
Good.
I'm here for the cheap seats. You know what I mean?
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I feel like a thing about cheap seats horror that I really love is that it's not categorically, but I feel like there's a sincerity about roller coaster horror, about cheap seats horror, that like, look guys, we're all here to have fun, right? And so do you find like with a touch point character like a Daria or like a like a Rory Cochrane in an Empire Records, do you find yourself hewing more in your own storytelling toward wanting to infuse cynicism into, or you know, realism, or I feel like cynicism is a sort of stigmatized word, into something sincere, or do you want to make these sincere works? Like, what's your sort of point of view on sincerity versus sarcasm?
That's a tough one. I feel like you need both, you know, you need at least a sprinkle of both. The same way that I feel like I get very bored in horror movies that take themselves seriously, that tend to be like the classics of our genre, because there isn't that kind of sprinkle of like sardonic commentary. There isn't that sprinkle of like tension relieving, like humor in a moment that I feel like you have to have that, so you don't just so it doesn't start to feel like a drone across the whole movie. Like, unless it's something, I don't know. I mean, honestly, the most terrifying movie I saw in the last couple of years was like Shiva Baby. Like, I was on like fingernails.
The first thing I was thinking of as you were talking was Bodies, 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 another Rachel Sennett starring scene stealing role.
Yeah, like fingernails into the like chair, like could not sit through the movie. It was so tense of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So like, unless it's a movie like that, which tend to have a shorter runtime and you can like make it through that, like, it's not fun to stay in fight or flight that long, you know? You need the like, you need the tension breaker in there. And that's the kind of like, I don't know, that's the thing that I'm drawn to. So I do feel like I have to add that bit of not necessarily cynicism, but just like a gallows humor. I also like, I come from a family built on gallows humor, I think.
Okay.
That if you didn't, you know, it's one of those like, if you didn't laugh, like you'd just explode kind of things. So like, I feel like that works its way a lot into my work. Just from like, you know, dealing with like childhood and like teenage trauma. Like you just have to figure out some way to deal with it. And that I feel like in my family and the people I'm around tends to be that.
You know what, this is kind of unrelated to anything, but since I have you here and you're a veteran, you've been doing this from so many points of view for so long, how has the branding of genre affected the desires for your creative output, where you're going to put out there and present and pitch as a filmmaker?
I feel like you're often, it still falls under the same category that I feel like it always has for me, where people who are holding the finances and executives at companies or whatnot, they do tend to chase the trend of whatever the last success was. So right now it's all like Smile and Barbarian, you know, that version of the thing.
The amount of PR emails I got in the wake of Get Out that were like, it's like Get Out meets X, like people like to where I should be interested in something. It's like, you know what? I'm sure that's exactly how the studio wanted it pitched to them when the director came to them and they were like, so how is it Get Out though?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's a big one too, is that I do feel like there's definitely like a tend for it to be almost dismissively referred to as like, we're looking for our diverse horror movie, you know? And it's like, but then it's like almost too superficially managed.
Yeah.
For what they're trying to present that as. And it's like, this isn't really doing the thing that I think you think it's doing.
Yes. Like, there's a reason why this thing succeeded, and there's a lot of nuance in why it succeeded.
Yes.
And what we're talking about right now are flashcards. And the thing the originating point of what we're discussing didn't succeed because of flashcards.
Yeah. That in a microcosm is like exactly what I feel like. It just across the board, it's whatever trend is occurring at the moment. It's always the flashcard version that they're looking for. So you're kind of pushed to like present your thing as like a little bit of that flashcard thing. So it's like, it's got this that you like, you know. So it's
jingling the keys over here for the baby.
Yes, that really is it. And you're trying to like sneak in like a different kind of movie through that regard. It's weird how it's like the tail wags the dog in our industry in that way. But then something else comes along and it's completely new and different. And everyone's like, oh, we need that now. We need that now.
Well, as somebody who grew up as one of the weirdos, Mister, and then, because like I find it like there's when something jumps off and say it's Barbarian, which is weird. barbarian is weird and crazy. When people say like, we want our barbarian, and they're like the behind the desk people, do you think they really mean it? Or do they want something as weird as that? Can they embrace when they get that weird on the page? Are they like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, because my kind of sense is like, well, we want our barbarian, but it's like, but if you got your barbarian, would you make it? And I kind of am like, I don't know that you would. Like, do you feel like you have the permission to be as weird as you have like maybe considered yourself to be at points in your life when you make your movies? Or are you kind of like, I need to shoulder in that, I need to elbow in that weird still?
I feel like I've had a chance to do that because the movies I've made have been very much in a lower budget range.
Sure.
So you have less oversight, and you're able to make, I think, kind of more individual weird stuff. Whereas once it gets to like a larger budget range, it's like everything is just a risk aversion. So like, what are all the little bells and whistles we can put on this to make it seem like this is not as much of a risk as it is, as any movie is? So that's kind of like what they're looking for just in general. Whereas like if once you get like a big success, then you can almost like, well, you're that thing.
Yeah.
You're the bell and whistle. So like you get to make, you can get to make your, you know, your Knives Out after you make your Star Wars movie, and then they trust you.
Yeah. I feel like any studio should know what they've got coming. If it's like Richard Brake's going to be in this movie, they should all be like, well, then run for the fucking hills. Like anything could happen. He's one of those like human spoiler kind of people. I was watching an episode of Andor the other night, and Stellan Skarsgård pops up on screen, and I was like, I'm pretty sure Stellan's going to be a good guy in this, but the fact that he's Stellan Skarsgård means I'm never going to be able to trust it. It's like when you see Caleb Landry Jones, and you're like, okay, Caleb, when's the other shoe going to drop? When are you going to reveal to me that you're the center of evil?
Yeah, you're just too sketchy. You're too sketchy.
Yeah, you're too unsettling. So I guess like my final question would be like to bring it back to the Daria of our point of origin. Because at the time Daria, like, she really fit the 90s despite being like, she was an outcast character, but she was so of her time that she was there was still a mainstream quality about Daria. Like, there were so many girls out there that were like, oh, it me. I was more, you know, I would have been a Quinn, honestly, but like a Jane in my heart sort of situation. Are there weirdos, mister, anymore? Or is weirdo the new normal? Because I feel like all Gen Z is weird. They're all weird and gay, and that's amazing.
That's a tough one because it's also like that's all of who I'm around, like, because I've been doing all of these like teen movies or the teen TV shows, and they're early 20s, you know, they're not teenagers, but they're early 20s to mid 20s, late 20s, and they're all of that generation. And they're much more aware of themselves, and they're much more conscientious, I think, to each other. But then again, this is like a very small cohort that I'm like sampling this from.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell, like, if I went back to my rural high school, what are those kids like? Like, I wonder that. I wonder what's going on there. Out in like
I've thought for so long that I need to like go back to my high school journalism class and just like explore for myself, like go and do it to talk to the kids ostensibly, but also to do like a covert mission of like, are the kids weirder now, or is there like that desperate desire to conform? Because like the shit that teens post on like their genius TikTok videos that they put online, it's like, you guys are kind of out of your minds and like putting it out there. So that tells me that like you're okay with it in a way that I don't know we were so comfortable with a less censored version of ourselves when we were in high school intrinsically.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think it was, I think there was a very conformist time too, of just like trying to just fit within a certain thing so people like could categorize you in a way, whereas it feels like all the walls of the categories have been taken down over the last like 15 years or so. But I don't know, maybe there's new categories that I just don't understand anymore. There could be all new ones. Maybe like the weirdness, it's like that is the new conformity is your level of weirdness. And if you're just like a kid who wants to like sit and read a book, you're like an outcast. Who knows? Like if you don't know
They're
how to
all
like
weirdos,
TikTok dance, or you're like, you know, I don't want to make it that derivative or like that distilled as a thing, but if you're not someone who wants to be on camera, like, what does that make you in today's world?
Do you feel like at this point in your career as a filmmaker, can you exist free of boxing? Or do you feel like you still fight against boxes of categorization?
I don't know if I'll ever be able to get out of that because, gender stuff. It's hard to not, be considered like that. And I feel like it's even at this point it's used as like, oh, you need another one, right? Like we got one.
Yeah.
So there's that, like, do I exploit that in some way? Like, but I also don't want to be considered that. I also didn't know that was something that was even considered until like 5 or 6 years ago. And then everybody just told me like how much more impossible it was to do the thing that I'm trying to do than I even thought it was. I was like in an ignorance is bliss bubble, I think. And I prefer to be back there, to be honest. So yeah, getting out of that category stuff. Also just, my category is like horror in general, which is like my thing, but that comes from like loving to be in an audience and be scared. Like, I would fucking love to rock like a rom-com fucking caper, like Romancing the Stone style, Yes! Rom-com caper, a romper. I want to make the rompers, just these big action caper rom-coms. Like I'd love to do that, but no one would ever think of me for something like that because it's, I'm still the misery chick.
You know what? I think there's nobody better to direct rompers than a lifelong misery chick who has the perspective from the outside to innovate the genre from the inside. And I have unfortunately reached the end of my time. But so I just have to say thank you, Roxanne, for coming and talking to me about this. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This went in directions I didn't expect, and I am very grateful for.
Well, that's good.
Thank you, Roxanne Benjamin. There's Something Wrong with the Children is now available to rent or buy on demand on pretty much any streaming service you like. You guys, you know where to find them. You have your preferences. And now, my one quick thing before I go. Next week, the Oscar nominations will come out. All of the horse racing will culminate in shortlisting on the way to the actual ceremony. S.S. Rajamouli, maybe he'll get to go home. Maybe he won't. Maybe he will still be in LA for months more, with NTR Jr. and Ram Sharon, just hustling for those nominations. I remember when I realized it was during the year Get Out was on its Infinity press tour toward the Oscars. And I realized, like, when there was a new quote from Jordan Peele every day, like from some different Q&A he was at, from different screening he attended, that was the year I realized that if you are in serious contention for an Oscar and you are trying to get that gold, if you don't live in LA, you're like not going home for a quarter. Like, you are out here, you have canapes to eat, you have hands to shake, you have panels to attend, you have elbows to rub. Like, if you don't live in LA and you are about that Oscar, I hope you have long-term housing, because you are in this for a marathon. Hopefully the Academy did do the right thing and that we will see justice for RRR in getting a Best Picture nomination, because it deserves it. But what I'm here to discuss today is that yet again this year, and we know this is true, like, it's the only way it exists is like fan campaigning on Twitter, common sense, the things we know in our heart to be true. But we're not going to see a nomination for Best Actress for Mia Goth and Pearl. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see a nomination for Rebecca Hall in Resurrection for Best Actress, even though, like, she's basically, as far as I'm concerned at this point, like neck and neck with Amy Adams for, like, where's her Oscar? Like, where's the Oscar for one of our great living actresses today? And it will continue to be bullshit like it has been every other year. Much like Toni Collette should have been her neck and neck in the final votes with her performance in Hereditary. It should have been Lupita Nyong'o's Oscar to lose for her work in Us. And she wasn't even nominated. They weren't even nominated. because horror is it's certainly exploded into the en masse consciousness. The boom, very much like ushered in by, like, formalized by Get Out, has yielded a wider embrace acceptance of, I think, expanded the fandom of horror from perhaps zones it had been relegated to in prior years. But as far as Oscar recognition goes, like, Get Out got that screenplay Oscar, but it's still every year in terms of the very formal awards, the tops and tails kinds of situations. It is a scream into the void if you want the best work in genre of a year to get the nod from the Academy as a most legitimate art form. Because, like, hey guys, I saw Women Talking recently. What a wonderful... Go see Women Talking. Support that film. Support every single goddamn thing about it. Sarah Polley, all the actresses, everybody doing the work. That movie, like, what's going on in that? What Rooney Mara, what Judith Ivey, what Sheila McCarthy accomplished in that movie as actors, that's what fucking Mia Goth is doing in Pearl. And Michelle Yeoh should win the Best Actress Oscar this year. That is my firm and full conviction. But alongside her, in that short list of nominees, alongside her and almost assuredly Cate Blanchett, who you'll see it, like, we should be seeing Hall and Goth, like, right there with them. You all know it. I know it. It's so self-evident that shouting about it, it's not going to make me sad that I'm not going to see it again, because I don't need the Oscars legitimacy for me to know that these movies are good and these performances are all-timers. But it is just so persistently boring to see the Academy constantly just shelve these works that we know are masterful and put them in this part of the pantry that's like, oh yeah, that's that weird can of beans that, like, we'll eat it if we're starving, but otherwise, like, it doesn't belong at the front of the pantry with the staples. It's not a prized item. Well, go screw yourselves. Like, you are simply depriving yourselves. You are depriving your institution, your viewers, people who still imbue your ceremonies with a shred of legitimacy and credibility. You're just depriving them of what was actually the best that year. And that's really too bad, because what those two women in particular, Mia Goth and Rebecca Hall, accomplished this year in front of the camera was titanic and brave and shocking and incredible. And nothing the Oscars do or don't do will change any of that, but it would just sure be nice if they could get off their duffs and do something a little more interesting a little more often. So nominate RRR for Best Picture at the very goddamn least, and then you better give Everything Everywhere All at Once that Best Picture Oscar on the day of. Like, that's just case closed. Lashana Lynch for Best Supporting Actor. Supporting Actress. That is it. That is my one quick thing before I go. With a heavy heart, I know my superstar Mia Goth will not be getting that Oscar this year. But that is our show, and you can follow us on Twitter at FeelingScenePod, or send us an email at feelingscene@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm JorCrew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Eben. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned. Audience supported.